It's a book called The Turner Diaries. If you have ever been involved in like far-right movements, you may have heard of it. It's considered the most dangerous book in the world. Seriously. So how can a book be dangerous? It's responsible for countless terror attacks. I went through the whole thing beginning to end, so I want to kind of give you a synopsis, tell you why it's considered the most dangerous book in the world, and point out where it's wrong. It was written in 1974, and it was released chapter by chapter in a newspaper, in like a magazine or something like that in the back. And it got so popular that he was requested to like release a full version of it. And in 1978, I think, he released a full version. Dude's name was William Luther Pierce. He wrote it under the pseudonym Andrew MacDonald. Yeah, it was a pseudonym, Andrew MacDonald. It's banned in like Germany and Canada and a whole bunch of other places. It's not banned in the United States, but I think it's not sold anywhere. I think you have to buy it from like the copyright holder or something now. But yeah, I found a digital copy that I read. William Luther Pierce, I believe, was a physics professor in Oregon State University, an extremely intelligent person and a reputable person. Part of the reason this book is so dangerous is because it details how to make a bomb with ammonium nitrate, and it explains how to make pressure plates to detect movement, and it explains how to counterfeit money in great detail. Like, it explains it all. So that's one of the reasons why it's been so widely read by right-wing terrorists. He eventually went on to found a gigantic, like, racist organization, or he joined a white nationalist organization. I don't remember exactly what it was. Genocides have to be planned. They're not spontaneous. It's not something where you just, like, you go out and, you know, you wreak havoc or whatever. Like Kristallnacht, you know, the Night of Broken Glass, where people rioted in Germany and caused, you know, burned down synagogue and stuff. That happens, but that's not a genocide because it's not organized. It's just haphazard, and they're not seeking people out specifically and setting up like a full bureaucracy and organization to bring an end to people's lives. Genocide or holocausts, they have to be planned. The Turner Diaries is the plan. That's the plan. It was written to be the plan. The book starts out with a guy named Earl Turner. It's written in a kind of a diary format where you're reading his diary entries. And every now and then a narrator pops in to explain something that Earl Turner meant or whatever. It's a sci-fi novel based in some future time. Anyway, Earl Turner is in his home and is talking about how unhappy he was when the Cohen Act, quote unquote, passed in the United States, which banned guns. You're not allowed to have guns at all. He said that when the act passed, he took all of his guns and buried them in an oil drum in the woods in Pennsylvania. So he's sitting at home when some blacks bust his door in. And the blacks, as he says, I'm just laying it out as he says it, the blacks start going through his stuff, and he thinks that he's being robbed, but he noticed that they're passing up like valuable items in his house. And then a white Jew walks in, I believe, holding a clipboard to tally what he finds, basically. Yeah, it's that kind of book. It's crazy, dude. Anyway, it turns out that they're searching for guns. They're doing house-to-house searches by force for guns. And he says that he hid a gun in his wall, basically, and they didn't find it. But he says he saw his two neighbors, a man and a woman, were being arrested because they had a gun on them, and they were in their underwear being walked away to the cop car with a baby still inside. You know, it's just like really atrocious, terrible stuff. The book is kind of written to give you, it's not a sympathetic book, like not sympathetic toward terrorism. It's positive toward it. It's actively trying to make you want to be like Earl Turner. It's crazy. So anyway, Earl Turner says, this is the line. This is it. They've crossed it. The blacks have busted into my house and searched my stuff. now I have to do something about it. I feel morally obligated to do something. So he pulls the boards off of his wall after they leave, gets his gun out, and calls up a few of his friends. You know, they've been renting a safe house from somebody with cash. So Earl Turner has had enough. He meets up with a couple of his friends, and they have everything that they need. They go dig up the guns, and they go to this safe house that they've been renting for a while and everything. And now all they need is money. So he goes to this convenience store, a liquor store, I think, and he says he sees a black behind the counter. So he asks the black for something behind him on the shelf. So the black turns around, and Earl Turner has a blackjack, which is like a kind of weapon. This is what a blackjack looks like. So anyway, he has a blackjack, and he goes up behind this black, quote unquote, and hits him swiftly in the back of the head and kills him. If I remember correctly, I believe he said in this part of the book that somebody else had to die too. And he started beating them, but they were screaming at the top of their lungs, like shrieking as this is happening. And it was hard for him because he had never seen or done this before, and he struggled with it. Because, as he says, they're honestly innocent civilians, but he understands that for the greater good, sometimes innocent civilians need to pay a price so that we can fix society. It's just insane stuff. Anyway, they go to the safe house, and this is the point at which they start planning terrorist attacks. He says he's trying to start a race war. That's the premise of the book. And his kind of plan to do so is to make bombs and blow up areas or things or whatever that would hurt the most amount of black people. And when the cops show up, he has a sniper rifle and he's picking off only the black cops and leaving the white cops from afar. He's trying to make people feel like there's a bigger divide. However, in the book, I think page 43 is what it says in my notes. Between page 40 and 45, he makes the point that Jews are responsible for the racial division in the United States. Says liberalism is the mindless default in the United States. And he refers to individuals as atoms and like families as molecules. And I thought that was super interesting, a super interesting thing, because I've only ever heard that one other time, that one comparison. And it was from Joel Webben. This is Joel Webben. Webben is a Christian nationalist who has written a Christian nationalist constitution that he wants to get set up in the United States, basically. An extremist, a pastor, just a complete nutcase. And he made that exact comparison, which I have never heard before.
I have grown to despise democracy is because it's not we the people. It's we the some people. And who are those people? Non-elected officials. And just for the record, I think the 19th Amendment should be repealed.
That's women's right to vote.
I think that because, well, first and foremost, because I'm a Christian, and that is the Christian position. Oh my gosh, you're saying that? Yes, that is the Christian position, is that households should not be divided against one another. So it's not just elevating a male vote, but it's elevating the household vote. We're saying that that society, if you break it down to the basic building block, is not atomistic as individuals, but molecular, being households.
So it's really interesting to me that the Turner Diaries made this comparison. It was worth making note of in my notes here. Anyway, back to kind of the basis of the Turner Diaries. He is intentionally not trying to hurt civilians who are white, but he believes that it's acceptable to hurt civilians for the greater good. You'll see that that's a theme in the book all the way through. Anyway, a couple other things that I made note of here that I thought was really interesting. On page 46, he said that he believes that God created the earth, but he thinks that it's millions of years ago and that evolution took place. So he is a Christian, but he's like an old earth creationist, I guess. He would have to be an old earth creationist, though, because he believes that, like, black people and white people evolved differently. There was, like, divergent evolution or whatever, and black people just didn't evolve as much as white people, so they're genetically inferior to Aryans. That's the basis of his idea. I mean, it's completely false, of course. There is one race. It's the human race. We aren't divided that way. There aren't different species of humans. They are all capable of crossbreeding and all capable of the exact same things as populations. But this is the basis of the Aryan belief system. This is where it starts kind of ramping up unexpectedly. Like up to now, you've been reading about Earl Turner feeling backed into a corner, like he had no other choice but to try to solve the problems in another way because he's under an oppressive government that doesn't respect human rights, doesn't respect, the protection from search and seizure, unreasonable search and seizure, doesn't protect free speech rights or anything else. Like his rights are gone because it's now an authoritarian government run by black people and Jews. So in this fictional universe, he's trying to put you in the headspace that you can agree with him, that this would be bad if this happened. And then he lays out things like the path that it took to get to there and encourages people who are reading the book to kind of watch out for these signals. That's basically like the premise. For example, when schools become integrated, when blacks and whites go to school together, that's a sign that blacks and Jews are taking control of the country, basically. That's the basis of the book. But it continues to like ramp up and get more and more extreme as you go. On page 46, this is where he kind of comes out and says the quiet part out loud. Okay, I have to be careful what I read because he says the N-word all through it. He basically said there were claims by Jews that Hitler used to fly into rages, that there were phony German plans for invasions of America, that they made lampshades out of humans, basically, and a whole bunch of other things. And that's true. Like, that really did happen. We have record of it. We have pictures. We have the physical items. Ellie Koch from, was it Buchenwald concentration camp, I think? She was the wife of the commandant of Buchenwald. She did that exact thing. She's called the Beast of Buchenwald, I believe. Anyway, he says that this is all like phony and there's no evidence for it. So that's where he kind of tips his hand and makes it like a lot more obvious what his bent is. If you're politically in the center and completely uninformed and you read this book, I can understand why it would pull you further to the right to imagine that there is this plot because all of these things that the book describes are happening. Segregated schools are coming to an end. Interracial marriage is acceptable now. Jews are like a protected minority group in the U.S. If you're uninformed, I get why somebody would go down that road. That's part of the reason why this book is so dangerous, because it lies to people and gets them whipped into a blood frenzy over falsehoods and then teaches them how to become terrorists, making bombs and pressure plates and all of it. I just finished writing a book titled Was Hitler an Atheist? It talks about religions during the Third Reich and how they work together. Catholics, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Protestants. And I even address the lies told by the evangelical world about Bonhoeffer. It's on Audible and Amazon. Okay, let's continue. He also said in this section on page 46, Jews convinced people it was true, and now the system is oppressing the people. Convinced the people that the Holocaust was real, that it really did happen, because he believes that it didn't. And he says the media, it keeps slandering his movement, which he calls the organization. It's an organization of people like him that are organized into like squads and battalions and everything. And, they have people behind the lines effectively that are like typing things up and making sure that things have, bureaucrats, basically. It has bureaucrats too. So he says that the media is portraying the organization as more dangerous than it is, which is like another example of him trying to pretend that he's not a terrorist, even though he at the end of the book, he clearly says terrorism is useful. It's a useful tool. It's just really weird. I think this is another example of him just trying to work people in, just ease them into that position. Around page 67, he says another one of those things that you need to watch for that like is a sign that blacks are trying to take over the United States from whites and Jews are trying to help them is when you see tax credits for people who like are racially mixed in mixed marriages. When you see people who get like who can buy a home cheaper because they get a tax credit from the government if they're racially mixed, that's a sign. He explains like why terrorism is valuable in his mind. On page 68, he says the point of terrorism is to create repressive action to get normies on your side. Get the government to overreact and take people's rights away so that others can see, like, wow, that's really messed up, and think to themselves, like, maybe these people are right. At the end, Earl Turner has a different take on terrorism, and, we'll get to that in a minute. Here are another couple of things that he said you should be watching for, basically, that'll happen when the blacks and the Jews are trying to take over. Laws banning taking advantage of somebody, trying to say this in a monetizer-friendly way, are illegal because any law banning it would presume a legal difference between men and women. And there is a there is a distinction between the two, but the law insists that there is no distinction between men and women. So by banning taking advantage of somebody, you're presuming that, I mean, it's just nonsense. It doesn't even make any sense. He also says that laws against taking advantage of people are prejudiced because black people are the ones that they're all the ones that are doing it. Those are the only people that go to jail for taking advantage of people are black. So it's a racist law. I mean, it's nonsense. It's all nonsense. He says Satanist cults reminiscent of Jewish mysticism is common. That's on page 87. Heroin is legal. Ritual murder is common. Single-sex schools are illegal, like all-girls schools. Those are illegal. There was a girl who was one of 4 white people at her school, and she was, like, beaten up and harassed every day. She couldn't be out of the sight of the principal or the teacher, or she would be taken advantage of by these black students. This girl, like, she complained about the fact that she's one of 4 white girls there, and that these people were taking advantage of her, you know. She told that to her mom, and her mom slapped her across the face and called her a racist. He says that the label racist is slander, vile slander against somebody, that the government keeps putting up signs, don't be racist, and they use, anti-racism as a pretext to, take people's rights away, basically. He also said, this is before the Satanic Panic really took off, by the way. This is 1974 when this was written, so that should tell you something. This is probably contributing to its major rise. He says Satanist clubs buy white girls. And he says about the people who do that, how could you sell a white girl to a Jew? He says a few pages later, a Mossad member showed up to interrogate him when he kind of appeared on the government's radar. Mossad being like the Israeli intelligence, I think. The Mossad agent basically told him that he'd be charged by an international military tribunal because he supports genocide. He told Earl Turner that. I mean, it's all like persecution nonsense. None of it is real. But people that read it, they see some of these things happening. Integration, racially mixed marriages, and a distinction between men and women blurring and all this stuff. They think that they see all these things around every corner, and it's a sign that the race war is about to happen, like any second. So he kind of works his way to the top of the organization. Like I said, it's organized into battalions and squads and companies and everything, just like the military. And they all have guns in the exact same way. They're all trained and everything. And he comes to the realization that hitting like the occasional government building, like the Oklahoma City attack by Timothy McVeigh, I don't know if you guys remember that, that was inspired by the Turner diaries, by this book. Timothy McVeigh had a chapter of the book printed out in his car when he was found or whatever. Turner in the book says we need to kind of, these attacks on government buildings like the Oklahoma City attack, they're not really helping us. They're not furthering our goals, because the ones that are like radicalized by government pushback are already there. And the ones that aren't just aren't going to change. So we need to start doing something more intense. And he says we need to start hitting power plants, fuel depots, food sources. Again, he's detailing exactly how one would go about fighting a race war. He even talks about like how to counterfeit money, like the whole 9 yards. It's crazy. Here's another one. Like, Jewish holy texts say some messed up stuff. So does Christian holy text and Muslim holy text. But nobody follows that stuff. Like the really, really messed up stuff. Like killing a woman if she's not a virgin. Like, Christians don't do that. Christians don't murder their children for talking back. You know, this old law stuff. It was a primitive culture that was not anywhere near as advanced as us in pretty much any way. And everybody today realizes it. But Earl Turner in the book points out some of the messed up stuff that the Jewish holy texts says. He points out that it talks about like non-Jews being like cattle, and they hate Gentile women and all this other garbage. So he's been waging this war for a while, hitting substations and stuff, and now it's a problem for the U.S. government that they've taken note of and they need to do something about, because they're taking out whole power grids now by placing bombs at the substations. And he says, at this point, mass rioting and looting started taking place, but only in the black areas, not in the white areas, because the white people are more civilized, you see. He said that there are some regiments in the U.S. military made up of like they're black-only regiments. And he said that they commit mass events of taking advantage of people. Again, trying to be monetizer-friendly here. He says that they do that. And I thought that was a really interesting point that it made, that Earl Turner said, because that was actually claimed in World War II also. The Europeans claimed that black-only regiment, or like black soldiers, were taking advantage of the people. It was false, and it was proven to be false, but people believed it anyway. The Pope even believed it, and coordinated with the Americans when the Americans were taking Europe back, coordinated with them on, you know, how they can get in and everything. And the Pope specifically requested that the Americans not send any black soldiers because he was afraid that they were going to take advantage of the populace incorrectly. But anyway, that was just like another repeated propaganda line by Earl Turner. So at this point, the U.S. military has, you know, lost control of everything. If a country tried to invade the United States, like say Russia or China or whatever, tried to invade coming through California or something, it would not work. Absolutely no chance. Because the populace is not on their side. Storming a beach is like a bloodbath. It's just really, really hard to do. And the only way that it worked for Normandy in World War II was because the Americans spread false intel that they were going to raid a different beach. So Hitler like amassed his whole attack squad on that beach. And the Americans had to invade like a less protected part that was further away. It's just not easy to do that at all. It's not happening. That will never happen in the United States, in my opinion, but it can be destroyed from within. You know, people can get really, really extreme and do psychotic things and radicalize other people. That could bring the country down. As Abraham Lincoln said, the only way the country will fall if it's taken from within, basically. I don't remember what the quote was. So the U.S. military can't handle it because like half of them are leaving or, you know, deserting or mutiny or whatever because they agree with the organization's principles. And so they're like attacking their fellow soldiers in the middle of the night and taking off and taking their guns with them. The U.S. military has lost all control of it, and the organization starts growing faster and faster until the U.S. military personnel that are guarding like a nuclear missile site, they all claim that site in the name of the organization. So now the organization has a nuclear missile to use. And they do. They shoot a missile in this book at like New York City, I think. Just one. And they said, I'm going to shoot a missile at a different U.S. city every day until the military stands down. He said he realizes that like the U.S. might launch missiles back, but that's okay. He doesn't care. As long as the U.S. is losing more people than the organization is losing, then he's fine. At the end of the day, if there are 15 people left, he's okay with that as long as it's organization people. Anyway, the U.S. is basically like the U.S. leadership crumbles. The organization takes control of everything. And the next step is to forcibly segregate the populace again. So they gather up a bunch of black people and Jews and take them on death marches to one specific area. I forget where, Louisiana maybe or something. They walked them there, and if they stepped out of line when they were marching, they were shot. If they fell down because they were too exhausted, they were shot. This is exactly what happened in Germany. They did this exact thing. And somewhere around like 60% of people would survive these death marches. Tens of thousands of people died in these death marches. Anyway, they death marched them to a new area where they could live separate from Aryans in the book. There was one commander within the organization who was less extreme than Turner was. So he hired some blacks, quote unquote, to help the forced segregation effort, to help like guard a truck while they were driving along, basically. And Turner describes like a different black person falling off of the truck and just like getting mangled, and the other black people just laughing because they're subhuman. Like they don't care about anybody or anything. That's how the book is portraying. I mean, it is wild. He says, I flinched at that because I found it disturbing, but they didn't. They had execution squads going around, and Earl Turner was the commander of an execution squad. They had a list, and this list was of women that slept with Jews or blacks. And he showed up to this little community center and grabbed this girl and put a rope around her. And she said, "Why are you doing this to me? I wasn't the only one that, was with a Jewish person. Helen did it too." And then the rope, got tighter. And Earl Turner in the narrative says, the honest answer to that is Helen wasn't on the list. And I don't need to kill Helen anyway. This will serve as an example to Helen and everybody else. He says, that's the thing about terror. That's why terror is useful. If you execute a few people, nobody else will step out of line for fear it'll happen to them. He takes his execution squad back to the barracks. No sooner did they set their guns down than they hear word that there are like bodies in the streets. So they go out to see what was happening, and people that were previously hiding Jews in their homes, protecting them, stabbed them and threw them out in the streets because they didn't want the execution squads to come for them. So if you notice, we have worked up from this guy being disgruntled that a minority group is taking control of the government and is like taking people's rights away. We moved from that to full-blown genocide now. We are in full-blown Holocaust territory in this book. And it was a slow burn. That is wild, isn't it? He says the population is half what it was before moving the blacks and I'm not sure if this word is a slur, so I'm not going to say it. The blacks and Latinos out. It's half of what it was before they moved them out. He says, now we're going to level the cities and plant trees where the buildings used to stand. Says, walking down the streets, he sees women hung up with signs around them that say, I betrayed my race. And there are men hung up too. And here's what he said about political terror. Political terror's arbitrariness and unpredictability are important aspects in its effectiveness. There are a great many people in Helen's situation whose fear that lightning may strike at them at any moment will keep them walking on eggs. That's why political terror is useful. That's basically what he said. And he says the girl that they did take out paid as much a price for other people's sins of interracial marriage as her own. They found realtors that were like selling homes. And if you remember at the beginning, the government was giving tax credits to people who were like interracially married or whatever. They could buy a home for cheaper because the government would cover part of it. So Earl Turner finds a list of people, of realtors who sold homes to interracial people and named them race traders. Says he's going to take them out. And the realtor, one of them, says, no, I agree with you. We're on the same side. I was only doing it because, I needed the money. And Turner said, he was thinking to himself, he implicated himself. That's even worse to me because it means that you would sell out your own race for $1. Somebody else gets upset, like one of the generals who I think runs California region in the book, basically gets upset that they're forcibly segregating. And he says that it should have been left up to a referendum. Like the people should have voted on whether they should be segregated. And Earl Turner says the people had a shot at self-governance and they blew it. They don't get to hold elections anymore. This is the mindset that Joel Webbon is in and others. A lot of the people that I cover, they're in this mindset.
The reason why I have grown to despise democracy is because it's not we the people. It's we the some people. And who are those people? Non-elected officials. Everyone is allowed to vote.
Right.
Everyone. And just for the record, I think the 19th Amendment should be repealed. I think that because, well, first and foremost, because I'm a Christian. And that is the Christian position. Oh my gosh, you're saying that? Yes, that is the Christian position.
There was a General Harding in California in the book, said that he wanted to bring the country back in line with what the founding fathers envisioned. The state should have held a referendum on racially segregating the regions. And he basically breaks away from the organization and claims California for himself and tries to institute the original Constitution before any of the amendments were added, like the Bill of Rights or anything. And in retaliation, the organization, Earl Turner, launches nukes at California and just glasses it, just levels it. I don't remember exactly what the pathway was to this, but a nuke falls on the Soviet Union. And, this is like Cold War era is when this book was written. And I wrote in my notes here, he worries about racial kinsmen in the Soviet Union. He'll take as many casualties as necessary as long as the enemy takes more. We'll still be standing when the dust clears. So the Soviet Union was hit, and Earl Turner was upset that white people died. He says, Germans and Jews were fighting in World War II, but we as in Americans, sided with the Jews because of corrupt leaders. Jews took over. That is exactly what was claimed about World War I. It's called the stab in the back myth. He's just repeating a lot of the stuff that Hitler claimed. He says, our race is like the cancer patient having a tumor cut out to save his life. Nobody is asking if the tissue being cut out is innocent, except they do, actually. They check to see if it's benign or malignant. So that comparison doesn't even add up. He says, we're all responsible for the morals of our race as a whole. If a black person commits murder, the entire black community is responsible for that. At the end of the book, he has to take over where the U.S.'s last stand. It was at a power plant, a nuclear power plant. It was, surrounded by what was left of their military. And he said that to get in was a suicide mission. He was going to fly a plane in loaded with explosives, and he was going to ram it into the nuclear power plant to take out everybody in the vicinity, basically. Because, none of the people in the organization lived there. So all civilians are acceptable losses in his mind. So he says he'll be the one to do the flying. Earlier in the book, It explains how, like, the organization passed out cyanide capsules, which he described exactly what the Nazis had as cyanide capsules. They were little glass capsules that you break with your teeth, and it knocks you out nearly instantly. They had them around their necks, like in a necklace, and if they were captured, they bite into the cyanide capsule so that they can't be tortured for information. Well, Turner was captured early on, and he didn't bite into the capsule. He was captured and tortured and everything, and they got information out of him. So when he was freed by other people in the organization, he was brought in front of a judge and of the organization, and the judge said, "You were supposed to give your life. Your life belongs to the organization. You were supposed to have taken the capsule, and you didn't. So your life is forfeit. We're going to send you on a suicide mission. And if you survive, then you survive. You'll be trusted as a brother as if it never happened. If you don't, then you will give your life with full honors, knowing that you helped your Aryan brothers or whatever." And he says he chose this as the moment that he wanted to do it, the airplane, flying it into the nuclear power plant. And here's what my notes say. He said he's giving up his life for his brothers. He asked if they accept it. They said, "Brother, we promise you everlasting life in us." I thought that was really interesting. Jehovah's Witnesses talk about everlasting life. Christians talk about everlasting life in heaven, right? And the people in the Turner diaries, like the organization, they talk about everlasting life in their legacy. It's exactly what the Nazis said. He's not pretending to not be a Nazi. Like, he openly says that he believes in, Nazi ideals and that the Germans sided with somebody else. So it's not like slander. Like, he actually believes this stuff. Here are my notes on it. I said he wanted immortality of another kind in the form of children, but it didn't work out. That's what Earl Turner said. Immortality in the minds of his comrades is what matters. November 9th is now celebrated as the traditional day of the martyrs, the people that died to take the country back for whites. November 9th. That's like White Pride Day, if you will. He basically said that you have to liquidate leaders to teach civilians a lesson. And this is like the very last note that I made. This is the narrator in the Turner diaries saying, speaking after his diary entries end. They say 1999 was just 110 years after the birth of the Great One. And I got to think, like, who's the Great One? And I realized it's Hitler. I know that Hitler was born in 1889 because I was born in 1989. And when I read that fact, I was like, oh, hey, 100 years before me exactly. Crazy. They called him the Great One in the book. Anyway, there's like a lot more to the book. Obviously, I couldn't cover it all. It's a pretty long, reasonably long book. But it's been most useful for radicalizing people and teaching them to make bombs and stuff. It's killed hundreds of thousands of people, this book has. And after reading it, I'm coming to find that a lot of the arguments presented by people that I talk about are right out of the book, word for word. Like this atom versus molecule comparison that Joel Webben made, for example. That's just one example of many. Word for word out of the Turner diaries. It's wild. By the end of the book, he openly says that this is a genocide. It's a Holocaust that he's committing, and he's proud of that. So, yeah, it works you all the way from being mistreated and having your rights taken away, all the way to full-blown Holocaust. I read the Turner diaries over a summer about 10 years ago. The GOP has been headed this direction since the 60s. Yeah, absolutely. Total nonsense. Not how humans work. No, it's not. It's not how humans work. It's all based on the Aryan myth. There is no Aryan race. Aryan is a fake designation. It's like Semite. There aren't Semites because there's no common ancestor to people that live in that region. The only reason that the word Semitic still exists is because it's a language grouping, and it's commonly used to refer to like anti-Semitism. Aryanism and Semitism are fake, made up by the Nazis to appease this pseudo-historical, pseudo-scientific nonsense. It's like phrenology, measuring skull shape, skull size, and the bumps on your skull and everything else, measuring that stuff to see if you're pure-blooded Aryan or whatever. It's nonsense. Like, you can't tell someone's skin color or race or whatever by the shape of their skull. What are you talking about? So yeah, that's the level that we're dealing with. The whole book was based off of Aryan propaganda. Could have this wrong, but I thought Aryan was more of a class at the time, like referring to royals. That's the origin of the word. It came from Proto-Indo-European region, the Iranian region, long, long time ago. And the word referred to noble people. But when it came to Germany and started spreading around as an ideal, between 1850 and 1900, when it really started taking off, when it started spreading as an idea, it turned to a genetic fact or whatever, just something that you have in your genes. You are an Aryan, and the Aryans are like super strong, super smart. The only reason that they appear to be equals to anybody else is because their blood has been muddied by mongrels. I'm just using the terms that they used. So that's the idea. The Nazis' conception of Aryanism is not the same as its original definition. By the way, I talk about like the whole thing. Was Hitler an atheist? OwenMorgan.com, or it's on Amazon and Audible if you want to check it out there. I talk about the origins of Aryanism, who popularized it, and how quickly it spread. And I talk about Hitler's religious beliefs, Nazi religious perspectives, the whole 9 yards. So give it a read if you're interested. You know what's really funny, actually? The Nazis had a famous picture of a young man that was, I believe, in the military, and they held him up as the quintessential example of a good Aryan. This is who you should strive to be. Beautiful, powerful, strong jawline and everything. He was Jewish. They identified this dude as an Aryan, and he was Jewish. Oh my God. They had to backtrack on that propaganda so fast. They pulled his picture and everything. Bunch of idiots, man. There's no difference. There's no difference. Absolutely crazy book. Tell me what you think about it in the comments.